Death is a universal experience. We're all going to face death. We've all had loved ones and people that we know who have died. But Christianity offers a completely different perspective on death than any other religion or philosophy. So let's begin exploring that by thinking rightly about death. As Christians, we need to think rightly about death. Death is the enemy. The Bible tells us that death is not natural. It's not part of the way that God created the world to be. Death is an interloper. Death is a result of sin. Death is a tragic thing. And yet, because of Jesus Christ, those who follow him have hope even in the face of death. That through Jesus' own death, he participated in death just like we do, but he was also raised from the dead. And that's what gives us hope and encouragement in the face of death. And so 1 Corinthians chapter 15 puts it like this. And the last enemy to be destroyed is death. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? Jesus has defeated sin and death through the cross and through the resurrection. And so, with that in mind, let's think about what happens after we die. Because of Jesus' victory and because we belong to him, as a result, Christians, upon death, are immediately ushered into the presence of Jesus himself. Take a look at a couple verses. Philippians chapter 1, verse 21, Paul says, "For to me, living means living for Christ, and dying is even better. But if I live, I can do more fruitful work for Christ. So I really don't know which is better. I'm torn between two desires. I long to go and be with Christ, which would be far better for me." So Paul is saying that if he lives, he's going to live a fruitful life for Jesus. But if he dies, that's okay too, because he's going to go and be with Jesus. We see something similar to that in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 8. Yes, we are fully confident, and we would rather be away from these earthly bodies, for then we will be at home with the Lord. So for Christians, after death comes paradise, and all the pain of physical infirmity, the pain of sin, and all the suffering of this fallen world is gone in an instant, because when we die, we're going to be with Jesus. We'll have the joy of being in his presence forever. And so, thinking about that, then what about grief? Even as Christians, we have grief because we suffer loss of people that we love, but as followers of Christ, we don't suffer grief in the same way that other people do. We have grief, but in that grief is an element of hope. And we see this in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. "And now, dear brothers and sisters, we want you to know what will happen to the believers who have died, so you will not grieve like people who have no hope." It says that without Jesus, people who suffer loss of death don't have any hope. They just have grief. We have grief too, but we also have hope because we know there's more to this life. We know that there's something greater that's beyond that tempers our grief. Our grief is tempered with hope because of Jesus Christ. And so that's why it's important to think about our ultimate destiny. We've seen that as soon as we die as a believer, we're going to go be with Jesus. But that's not the end of the story, because the Bible teaches that when Jesus comes back to this world again, he's going to make everything new. And at that time, those who belong to him are going to experience a glorious resurrection. When we die, our bodies are separated from our spirits. Our bodies go back into the earth, that our DNA decomposes and is merged with the elements of the earth again. But when Jesus comes back, we'll be reunited with our bodies in a glorified eternal form. Much like the form that Jesus has now. He's been resurrected from the dead into this body that is just far surpassing anything we can imagine now. And the Bible tells us that those who belong to him are going to be resurrected into a body similar to his. Now, every human being is going to be resurrected, but Christ's followers are going to be raised from the dead into this glorious, eternal, supernatural body that will never decay, that will never fall apart, that will never be subject to death again. And beyond that, at the same time, when God creates this whole new creation, This whole new heavens and earth will have a new place to dwell that's perfectly fitted for these resurrection bodies, and a place where we'll be in the presence of God himself with Jesus, and there'll be no more tears, there'll be no more sorrow, and it's going to be a time of great joy and incredible fellowship with God. Let's read about that in Revelation chapter 21. I heard a shout from the throne saying, "Look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All these things are gone forever." And the one sitting on the throne said, "Look, I am making everything new." So you can see how Christians think about and even experience death differently than anyone else. And that's what gives us hope and encouragement about what happens after death. Death is still an enemy, but Jesus has conquered death on the cross and in the resurrection.